Hi, this is Teddy. You're listening to Anna Musky-Goldwyn and Anthony Barkett from Political Playlist on Two Broads Talking Politics. Get your vaccine.
Hi, everyone. I am Kelly. This is Two Broads Talking Politics, and I am on today with Anna Musky-Goldwyn and Anthony Barkett from Political Playlist. So hello to both of you.
Hi, thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for joining me. So let's jump in with what is Political Playlist? This is fairly new, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about what it is and what got you started on it.
Yeah, so Political Playlist is a nonpartisan platform. You are correct. We only launched about 7 months ago, but it's a nonpartisan platform that gives users new ways to connect to our political system. And currently how we do that is we educate users about the youngest members of Congress. We focus on lawmakers who are under the age of 45. And then we also have a conversation series where we really talk to people in multiple fields and just kind of learning how different fields intersect with our political system.
Yeah. And, what really motivated us to start Political Playlist was, I would say there was one event that it was for Abby Finkenauer, and she came out to California and was fundraising, and she had a truly inspiring story. And she's about 1 or 2 years older than us. And, we sat there and we go, how could we get her story out and many other young politicians like herself to other people? And that really started us on the young politician train. And we realized that only 17% of our Congress is under the age of 45. And with that being said, we wanted to increase that number at some point. And exposing people to these young politicians, we thought was the way to go.
Yeah, I love talking about young people in Congress because it's the only time I'm considered young. I'm 42, so I'm just under
you're
that.
Totally in.
I'm a young person for Congress. So 17%, I think a lot of people know about people like AOC maybe,
right,
when they think about young politicians. But these aren't just Democrats. This is all over the political spectrum. What are there things that these different young people, quote unquote, Congress people under the age of 45, are there things that that they're thinking a lot about? What are the issues that are really driving these politicians to run for office this early?
Yeah, one of the most interesting things that I think people don't realize is that there are a lot of issues that previously were considered quite partisan that now amongst younger lawmakers are pretty much fully bipartisan. The one that I think would resonate the most with people is climate change. And, we certainly grew up in a world where there was a faction of politicians who not only didn't believe in climate change, but were rejecting that there was anything that needed to be done about it. And now you see amongst young politicians that whether you're a Republican or you're a Democrat, there is a consensus that this is happening. This is something that needs to be addressed. And what's interesting is then, people's politics differ on how to address that. But I think that what we see a lot from, the research that we do and the information that we put out there is that there is more consensus around a lot of these larger issues that have more future implications because we're the people who are going to be living with the repercussions of it. So I would say that climate change is sort of like the hot button one that people, would be interested to know is increasingly bipartisan and obviously that a lot of young voters really care about.
Sure. And I think just adding to what you mentioned, a lot of people out there know some of these young politicians, but, I would say on our platform, maybe only 5. So when you do go on there and get to understand some of these politicians, it's fantastic because you're reading about people you haven't really heard about and then end up really falling in love with after, a couple newsletters.
Falling in love with is a very hardy term.
I don't know if falling in love with, there might be. Yeah.
Look, there's some good looking members of Congress, so you never know.
So what is your platform? It's got a few different things. What are ways that people are interacting with it and learning more about these politicians?
Yeah, so we actually started on social media. We really focused on Instagram because we wanted to be a very design-driven platform. And that really was born out of, most people, but specifically young people now we have a very high level, sort of a high standard for design, whether we know it or not, just based on the world we live in. And so Instagram was really where we started. So people can find us on Instagram at Political Playlist. And then when we officially launched the platform, that lives on our website, politicalplaylist.com. And our website, you go on, you take a quick survey that identifies what issues you care about, what types of politicians you want to see.
Only about 3 minutes.
Only about 3 minutes. We say it's like you can have a cup of coffee and you'll be done with it. And you'll be matched with 5 young politicians who speak to those interests. But then also on our website, we have a database of all of the 74 politicians that are under 45, and we have a blog. So the sort of hardier stuff on the platform lives on the website. But we also, are very symbiotic with our social media.
Yeah. And our conversation series as well. So, we're interviewing politicians and then as well as other thought leaders or political leaders, that really speak to our generation. And it's a way to engage in politics without feeling too political all the time. But, one thing I just wanted to mention about our playlist on there is a feature that we've put in there that we think is really interesting is when you get your 5 politicians, you can opt in for this curveball candidate. And that's someone who will sort of be on the opposite end of the, answers you put in that our algorithm spits out. And we've noticed that the majority of the people who have signed up have opted in for this curveball candidate. So, you can stay in that echo chamber if you want to, but a lot of people are opting not to.
Yeah, I like that. I tried it out. I did the survey and I got a curveball, and it was someone I hadn't heard of who was a Republican. Spoiler alert, I'm a Democrat. And it was a Republican. But yeah, it was interesting because I was like, oh yeah, she's close to my age. She's got kids. Like, there are things that we have in common. And yeah, this is someone that I don't normally follow or think about. So that was really fascinating to see that. You're talking about Instagram and your use of Instagram. And I think Instagram is the one social media thing that I don't use as well or as much because it doesn't seem to play well with other social media. So there's lots of things that you can like spit out the same thing to Twitter and Facebook and, and it doesn't get to Instagram. What does Instagram look like in terms of engagement? Are you like, as you're putting up conversation series and things like that, are you getting that sort of organic conversation with the people that are following? Do you think that this is ultimately reaching the kind of audience that you're hoping to reach?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the really interesting thing about Instagram is that I think that there's something about a visual that really can get people going. And I think you get a slightly different demographic than you would get on Twitter. And while Political Playlist is certainly built for anyone of any age, we're venturing into TikTok. We're not quite there yet, but certainly Instagram does skew younger in terms of the demographic of people who are on there. And we've had a lot of conversations with, young people who have been enthusiastic about the platform. And most young people get their news like on Instagram, now increasingly on other platforms like TikTok. So I think that in terms of engaging with a demographic that we're really interested in reaching, Instagram is certainly a place to live and to create those conversations. And the other thing that I would add is that, I know Facebook has a live feature. I don't know if Twitter has a live feature at the moment, but
I think it's not super easy to use though.
Yeah. But like the Instagram live, I mean, especially like in COVID, it has been this really interesting thing where we've had very few resources when we were starting out, and we were able to have these live conversations with people. And it's cool when you're on Instagram Live, people can comment while you're talking, and just the shareability of it is really interesting. So I think that as a platform, like totally hear you. It's definitely maybe could use some, editing in terms of how it deals with the other ones, but it's definitely worked out for us thus far.
But I think the platform really grew because of COVID in terms of us being on Instagram. And when we first started this, I mean, we launched right before the last election, and, we had, tried to get the platform up and running, and then COVID hit. So things just got delayed, and we realized a lot of our conversations had to happen basically over Zoom, Instagram Live, and that's where most of the people actually felt comfortable doing them. So, like it or not, I think that's how it really grew.
Yeah, we had a lot of big plans for live events, as I'm sure many people did. And that was quickly disappeared.
Yeah, I was going to get in a van and drive all over the country in 2020 and do live shows. And yeah, that didn't happen.
We've all had to pivot.
Yeah. But, I think it's good. Ultimately, we have more tools in our tool belt now that we can we do those live shows, but, have better ways to connect too.
Yeah.
Good practice in the meantime, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So what got each of you interested in politics in the first place? Anna, of course, your dad played the president on TV. So, I don't know if you were already interested in politics before that, but what really sort of brought you into thinking that this is something you want to devote, a big chunk of what you're doing, focusing on politics?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that played a very minimal part. I feel like watching your dad be a, lying, cheating, scandalous president is not the most confidence instilling
and that's going to be a little weird.
But on that note, for me, it very much did come from my parents. I grew up in a very engaged household, but I think like a lot of I guess young people now is different, right? Like I'm a millennial. I think you see Gen Z now, there are 12-year-old, you look at Greta Thunberg, right? Like there are people now getting involved earlier than ever. But for our generation, at least, like people didn't really talk about politics when I was in middle school and high school. And then in college, Obama was the first president that was in office when I was of age. And I think that, that created this dynamic where suddenly I realized, oh, this stuff is actually really important. And people like to bash on millennials of us being sort of like a selfish generation. And I think that can be true, but I also think that we do understand how we relate to the world in a really specific way, I think. And so that's something that we're trying to capitalize on in Political Playlist, which is like, there's a shared generational experience amongst many of the elected officials, or most of the elected officials that we cover, and then people who are around our age that might have not been that interested in politics until they were in their 20s or in their 30s. And that's okay. Like not everybody is born an activist or born sort of like a regular voter. And sometimes it takes a little bit of work and education for people to understand that. So I sort of, I was a voter, I was informed, but I wouldn't say that I was as engaged as some other people. So a platform like this would have been really helpful for me actually when I was in college, I think.
Yeah. And then I was engaged a little more with internships, but I would say I was very influenced by my grandfather. He was an immigrant from Lebanon, came over to this country, the true American dream. And he had always encouraged me and all, my cousins to get involved in politics because we're very lucky to live in a country where we can vote, be involved, be engaged. And I was lucky enough to do some internships in DC for 3 summers. But, I think what it came down to was Anna and I somehow became, that friend in the friend group everyone came to ask about, who do I vote for? What do I do? And I don't know this person. So we had, in our separate group of friends, we're making these lists for our friends and telling them, here's who we're voting for. Here's why, check them out. And then we go, man, we wish we just had a playlist we could share with them. And that was sort of where the idea grew out of, but focusing more on young politicians than, statewide and whatnot for right now.
Yeah, that's great. So you guys made me feel young earlier that I was a young politician. You made me feel really old when you said Obama was the first president you could vote for, but okay.
It's okay. We can go talk about some of the older politicians too, and that'll make you feel really young.
Yeah, I mean, compared to someone like Chuck Grassley, I'm a toddler. So So as you were going through and putting this together and thinking about this, what do you make of the fact that only 17% of Congress is under the age of 45? So this is, a generation that has a lot of things that it's interested in, like you mentioned, climate change, but it also has a lot of roadblocks to running for office, a ton of student debts, not a lot of wealth. I think something like 2% of all the wealth of millennials is held by one person. So, this is a group that, that can, it really has a lot of things that could stand in the way of running for office, but a lot of good reasons to run for office. And there's still that need for representation. So, what do you think are some of those barriers? And do you think that there are ways to get people engaged, not just in thinking about who do I vote for, but in actually running for office?
Yeah, I think that, money is like a big one that we've talked to a lot of people about. And I think, the amount of money, I think it's something like
it's about
$1.5 million to run a congressional campaign. And
crazy now. And
that's like on the low, that's like the lower end, right? That's like if you're running sort of unknown in, a not high dollar state. So that I think is one of the biggest issues. And the cool thing is that, when we started, there was 16% under the age of 45 in Congress. Now, after the 2020 election, there's 17%. So it is
That's
growing.
That's all due to political
it is growing. And I think that, to your point, like there are these roadblocks, but I'm quite heartened in the fact that I think more and more, and look, this last year has been sort of case in point, people are understanding that politics is in their life, whether they want it or not. And I think for a lot of young people, we grew up essentially in a partisan atmosphere. Like, I don't think that there was ever a time in my sort of like cognitive adult or adolescent life that I remember thinking that like things were going well. And so I think that there's this like very natural disenfranchisement that has happened for people who would sort of be of that age to be running for office, like in their 30s and early 40s now. And I think that that's kind of shifting because I think that people are finding more reasons to get involved. I think the other thing that's cool, and we've talked to a bunch of organizations on Political Playlist already, is there are more and more organizations that are helping people run for office. So whether it's focused on young people, whether it's focused on minorities or women, I saw that you talked to someone from Vote Run Lead, like that's a great example. So I think that that has been noted that there are a lot of barriers, and not only in the public sphere do I think that there's legislation out there to talk about campaign finance reform and whatnot, but also there's a lot of nonprofits that are starting up to facilitate this, which I think is a great thing on the left or the right or wherever you fall. I just think that the more we can get. Anthony actually just interviewed Representative Anthony Gonzalez, who's a Republican from Ohio. And
from my home district in Ohio.
No way. Oh, there you go.
Ohio 16th.
He was such a great interviewee. But he said this thing I thought that was really interesting was that you just have to get involved earlier. So it's like, people are now understanding that state and local elections matter. People are understanding that primary elections matter. And hopefully by seeing all of that stuff, they start to realize, we've talked to these young politicians, and for them, it was just like, I have no other choice. I have to go do it. And I think more and more people are starting to feel that way, but I'm an optimist, so don't quote me.
and just to like throw a few stats though at you, fundraising is definitely the major impediment to getting involved in the race. And many of these young leaders we've talked to have said, I was spending all my own money, driving across by myself, have a family, it's very difficult. You're down in the polls by, 10 plus. But, they were saying, we're in a much more connected world than we've ever been before. And when some of these politicians come to the coast or larger cities to do fundraisers, they said their average funding from a person in these big cities is above $50, usually around $75 to $100. And in their own hometowns, it's $5 to $10. So you can imagine how influential it is to get these young leaders out there so people learn about them, hopefully tell their friends and help help them get to that goal. And, when we started, there were 16% under the age of 45. Now we're at 17. Before, the platform was 65% Democrat, 35% Republican politicians. Now, after 2020, it's about 50-50. And that was from mostly older Republicans retiring and new, younger Republicans taking their place. So it's interesting to see how that shift, happened within that last election.
And do you think with that shift, so, it feels like the country is growing increasingly partisan. I mean, it's been pretty partisan for a long time, but it just keeps feeling like it's further and further apart. Do you think that as we get more younger representatives, and especially as we get more younger Republicans who are replacing these older Republicans, then younger Democrats replacing these older Democrats, that they will find ways to connect on these issues that can bring them together, these things like climate change, or, in the younger group, it might be student loan debt or parenting. There's all sorts of things that might bring them together generationally. Do you think that we'll see those kind of conversations happening more? Are you seeing that happening a little bit more as we move past the 2020 election?
Yeah, I think that, look, there's always going to be the partisan issues, and that's the way that the country is, and for the most part always has been. But I think that, those issues that you said, another really interesting one that someone had been telling us about was that the deficit, which is traditionally seen as a conservative issue, is now becoming bipartisan amongst young politicians because we're going to be the ones dealing with the national debt in 50 years. So I think that as that list of issues grows, I feel that there is going to be more consensus around them, because the other thing is that I think that there's, in the general public now, there's a growing feeling of like, if you're not good, we're going to find someone to replace you. And I don't think that was quite as strong before. I mean, like, look, the best example of that obviously is AOC, right? She felt like her incumbent was not doing a good job. She came in and surprised everybody and turned into who she is. So, and that's not just AOC, that's happening all around the country with much lesser known people who are, primary challenging their sort of solidly red or solidly blue district. And I think that what that says is that they can also be challenged, and that there's more, Anthony's point about us all being connected. It's like, there's more opportunity for someone to go on social media and be dissatisfied with what you're doing as a politician. And there's a lot more opportunity for someone to go on social media and be really, praising of what you're doing. And so,
and we see both sides of it on political playlists.
and so I think just with that sense of like public pressure, which is just, swelling in every area of our life now, that does create a new sense of accountability. And I think that, one statistic that's very interesting is that 50% of Americans identify as independent. So they might vote one way or another more, but that's half of the country doesn't pick a party when they register to vote. So that 50% is looking for something. And I think even if you talk to the most far left or the most far right people, everyone's kind of fed up with the rhetoric that's going on and the outrage that people are seeing in our politicians. Like we say, like, people are sick of outrage politics. Even if you have these really strong far left or far right beliefs, for the most part, we're all, we're done with it.
And I think that was a main reason why we started Political Playlist was, on the left and the right, you have many organizations. After you read their newsletters, you are emotional, right? You kind of go and need to let off the steam. And we didn't want that. We wanted to, have something that anyone could read, anyone could enjoy. And, I think, today people are getting, sick of it being so emotionally charged, and they want to just know the facts and who these people really are.
And I think what that ultimately will lead to is to your first question, which we've really diverted from now, is just
we're good at that sometimes.
Yeah, we're great at talking. But what that really leads to, I think, is that you will see consensus among people. And we see it literally every time that we go through the news about these 74 young people to send out in our newsletter. there are, I would say, almost a third of the news we're writing about is them working on a bill, not just with someone from the other party, but with someone from Political Playlist from the other party. Mm-hmm. So we see, people consume what's on CNN or Fox News or whatever, but there, as you know, there's so much more going on in politics than just the headline of the day. And that's really what we want to get across is, that level of information.
That's great. And it's such a twist to think that you're using social media to tone down the emotion, which is not normally how people use social media. So, maybe Instagram allows for that.
Yeah.
That's really great. Somebody once described our podcast as politics without the shouting. And I was like, yes, that is what we're aiming for.
Thank you. Finally.
You're like the public radio podcast.
Yes, exactly. So you both pointed to family as being influential for you. If there are people like me who have young kids, I know lots of people are listening who are raising young kids or teenagers. Do you have suggestions for how to approach politics in a way that will lead them to remain engaged, not get disenfranchised, the way that can often happen, and raise the next budding generation of political playlisters?
Yeah, I always say the best, and now every school offers really unique and interesting programs. And I always tell young people, if you have the chance, try and get to DC. There are so many young people there where you might not like politics, but there's so much more than politics going on. But the fact that you get to be in our nation's capital, understand our history, and get to, do it with a bunch of young people who, aren't as like-minded, but it allows you to have a menu of what there is to offer there. And that will engage you in politics for the rest of your life, I believe. A lot of my professors were honestly a big influence into starting Political Playlist. Obviously.
I would also say, for a more mushy answer, that, and this is something that we've heard from a lot of people that we've interviewed, is that I think there's a really overwhelming sense of, I have to care about everything and I have to be an activist in every area and every issue. And that's just not the case. Like, pick a thing, pick an issue or a couple issues that really matter to you. And that, by the way, can be happening when you're 10 years old. If you're, like when I was 10, I was like, all I cared about was animals. And I'm like, if anything happens to an animal, I am going to lose my mind. And so if that's the thing when you're 10, and it might evolve once you're 20, like encouraging young people to learn about what's happening in our government as it relates to the issue that they care about. Because I know that I had a very intense feeling of being overwhelmed, especially when I was like in my early 20s and even in my teens. We were in our early teens during like the start of the Iraq War. And it was just like, I was like, I don't really understand what's going on, but I feel like I need to care. And it was this really intense feeling of the world kind of like closing in on you. And it's okay to feel overwhelmed would be my advice, and to just find the thing that matters to you and then pursue that, because someone else is going to pick a different thing and they're going to pursue that. And so if we all just pick a thing, then suddenly we are making the world better, and our ideas of better might differ, but that's what creates a healthy political system, as opposed to one that's just kind of built on like strong ideology without much information and education to back it up.
And we tried to implement that in our platform. And when you take our survey, we try and encourage everyone to, focus on, their 4 issues. And we've heard from some users that was actually difficult for them. They had to sort of think, what are my top 4? So, we're really encouraging people, like Anna said, you can make a huge influence by focusing on your 1 or 2 issues that matter to you most.
Yeah, that's great advice for older people too, not just
everybody. Mom and Dad, if you're listening.
So tell us how people can sign up and can get involved with Political Playlist.
Yeah, so you can go to politicalplaylist.com, click create my playlist. And then, like we had mentioned, you'll take a quick survey and be matched with 5 young politicians. Every other week, you'll receive news updates on those 5 politicians, along with some other great stuff we put in our newsletter. And then, as I said, you can follow us on Instagram at Political Playlist. You can also find us on Twitter. Yeah, but I think, going on our website, I'd also encourage people we have a section in our menu called Meet Your Leaders, and that's a complete list of all of these 74 young politicians. And if you have some time and it's something that interests you, peruse around a little bit. We think our website is really chic and great looking, and hopefully you will too. And there's a lot of information on there in a really digestible way that we hope people can consume.
And I think, we can guarantee you the news that you will be reading in your newsletter is stuff that you're not, reading in the mainstream news. And it's, sort of a breath of fresh air from the politics that a lot of people are dealing with on a daily basis.
And of course, my favorite Congresswoman, Lauren Underwood, from right here in Illinois, is one of these 74. And she came up on my list, which wasn't surprising when I said Midwest women.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Great.
Is there anything else you guys wanted to make sure we talk about?
Well, speaking of Lauren Underwood, actually, one interesting thing about Political Playlist that specifically maybe some of your listeners might find interesting is that our audience is mostly comprised of millennial women. And as a millennial woman, I'm very proud of that because I think it means the millennial women care about the future and want to get themselves educated. So that's just kind of a fun thing to throw out there.
And then I was going to just mention the other thing was, we are a young organization, but we were recently nominated for a Webby Award in Government and Civil Innovation. And that was our competition was the White House. And unfortunately, we lost, but we came in second with the People's Voice Award. So we were just really happy that, as only around for 6 to 7 months that, we got noticed for a design award. Yeah.
And we'll let the White House have
this one. Yeah.
This time.
this time around.
All right. Excellent. Well, Anna and Anthony, thank you for joining me. And thank you for stepping up and building this. I think it's great. And I hope that you do get a lot of millennial and Gen Z people involved. And I think it's great to highlight these younger politicians.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.